What if you were autistic, but no one knew? Not even you. No internet, no diagnosis, no words for why you felt different. This was life in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s for countless autistic people, as well as decades before that. I got the idea for this video because one day I was thinking about how I feel connected now through platforms and things, and I all of a sudden felt sorry for people who didn't have access to this, and I thought about and wondered how lonely were they not knowing and having no way to know what was going on with them. Being autistic in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, before the internet made information readily available to easily accessible, it was often incredibly isolating and confusing, and sometimes dangerous for people who were autistic who didn't know it. Here's a breakdown of what life might have felt like during some of those decades, in case you wondered like I did. Number one, in general, there was just a lack of information and awareness. Diagnosis was rare, especially for women. Many autistic people were just labeled odd, difficult, mentally ill, or shy. Often, autism was diagnosed in very young children with significant support needs, was the only way it was made aware. So if back then, if you were level 1 autism, or maybe even level 2, you might not even been on their radar as something being different about you enough to check more into it. There was no language for self-understanding. Without the internet, most autistic people didn't even know the word autism, let alone understand that it could possibly describe them. Neither did their families understand that. There was no way to search for answers about why you struggled with things that other people found easy, like talk, noise, bright lights, or change in routine. Imagine many of them were just seen as the oddball. So number 2 would have been school and social life. Mainstream schools didn't accommodate neurodiversity. It wasn't even a word back then. Autistic kids were often punished for behaviors they couldn't control, like stimming, meltdowns, or being pushed into conformity without understanding. Many of them were bullied, and there was misunderstanding. It was extremely common. Kids who were different, quiet, blunt, intensely focused, or weird were socially isolated, and many of them were probably put into special ed classes. Special ed was often segregated, and inclusion was rare. If you were in special education, your potential might have been ignored. If you were in general education, your needs were often unmet. Number 3, your family life would have been different. Parents back then were often blamed for their children's behavior. The apple doesn't fall very far from the tree kind of thing. Especially mothers, and there were outdated ideas of the refrigerator mother theory, which blamed mothers for autistic kids' behavior. But now we know that wasn't true. How you were raised is not going to cause autism. There were no parenting resources existed for respected neurodiversity. Well-meaning families often tried to correct their children's autistic traits, believing they were behavioral problems. I can imagine maybe a little boy back then being told by his father to suck it up and boys don't cry. And, when they didn't understand, the boy was having a meltdown, how tough that would be harder for boys. Number 4 would be adulthood. During those years of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, before you had the internet or were able to know that you had autism. So masking was often a survival tool. Autistics learned to camouflage, but often at a cost to their mental health. And for many of them, it led to burnout, anxiety, depression, and without them knowing not why, and as well as suicide of those who were autistic who didn't know and couldn't figure it out. Jobs and relationships were hard to navigate before we had the information age and technology. Due to unspoken rules and sensory overload and lack of accommodations or understanding, it would have been very hard to be an autistic adult who had to care for a family, especially, I guess, as a husband back then, just to make it at work, make ends meet. There was no communication, no validation. People felt like they were broken or failures because they couldn't do what others could seemingly do easily without knowing that they were alone. They probably felt like nobody else thought the same way they did, and they were just different and didn't know there were so many other people out there feeling the same way because there was no community, no support groups online to connect with. And number 5 is that media representation. You had the early images of like Rain Man as what we understood as autism being. That film from 1988, it shaped public perception for years, reducing autism to one narrow image, a savant with poor social skills. And we know that autism is a spectrum and it's spherical, not linear. And few, if any, autistic voices were heard publicly. Advocacy was done about autistic people, not by them. I think about people like Temple Grandin, which was really my first idea of what an autistic woman was. And, you know, she dresses a little bit different, and I just assumed that's what autistic women were like based on that one person. When I didn't realize for many years until after that autism is many things and presents differently in women. So here's the difference before the internet versus after. Before the internet, you might go your whole life never meeting another person like you. You had no access to articles, forums, videos, hashtags explaining your experience. And you couldn't self-diagnose or even suspect you might be autistic unless a professional told you, and most didn't, especially in women. But after the internet, you could Google about your experiences and find stories that matched. You could find online communities. You were connecting on Reddit, Tumblr, Twitter, YouTube, personally where I connect. And you could share, and there was a name for their experiences. Self-diagnosis became a valid first step to understanding and still continues for many who can't afford the process or just don't have access to the process of getting a diagnosis. Hashtag actually autistic voices emerged, shifting the narrative to pride, acceptance, and advocacy. So we think about back then how much loneliness autistic people must have felt. And so many people even before that who lived their whole lives and passed away not even knowing they had autism. I'm grateful to live in a time like now where this information is available and it changes our life and we don't have to feel lonely anymore. We can connect in some form or another for many of us with that information that we need to live our lives and shape our journey and gain understanding. So the final thought on this is to be autistic in like the 60s through the 90s, even before that, often meant living without a mirror and without a community to confirm your worth. Many autistic adults today who grew up in that era talk about some of the grief of not knowing, and I've had some on this channel like in their 70s, 60s, and 70s talk about that and how difficult it was. At least they have the understanding now and the community and support, but they didn't have that. The first person ever diagnosed with autism was a boy named Donald Triplett in 1938. He told the doctor, "I may be sick, but I believe I do have brains." That one sentence captures what so many autistic people have felt for decades. Smart, capable, but completely misunderstood. So thanks for watching this video. I want to know what your thoughts are. Have you ever thought about that? Wondered what was it like to be autistic before we had all of this technology to understand ourselves and connect with others? What are your thoughts on that? And I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.